Max Scherzer dominated the Mets in the 2015 regular season's final game, striking out 17 batters en route to his second no-hitter that season, one of the most dominant no-hitters in baseball history for sure. In a 1994 season where his ERA was 12% below the league average, and his FIP was deemed awful by the Fangraphs gods, Bobby Witt of the Oakland A's struck out 14 Royals in a one-hit shutout. Brandon Morrow of the Blue Jays struck out 17 batters in a one-hit, 1-0 win against Tampa Bay in 2010. Probably the most dominant outing of his entire life. Pitching dominance comes in many forms, can happen at almost any time, and can be done by anyone. It's one of baseball's best qualities. There are, though, some flashes of dominance so overwhelming that they're in a complete league of their own, atop the mountain of historic pitching performances. The game which possibly rests alone at that mountain's peak came on May 6, 1998 between the Houston Astros and Chicago Cubs, where 20-year-old Cubs rookie Kerry Wood threw what some deem to be the greatest game a starting pitcher has ever thrown. But is that true? Let's talk about it. The unpredictability of baseball is something that makes the sport stand above the rest in my eyes. While modern analytics help us better predict what is and isn't going to happen at a certain point in time, its reach is limited. Regardless of the likelihood of that event, if you can imagine something happening in baseball, then there's a good chance that it can actually happen. Unpredictable is a pretty good word to describe the game we'll be talking about today. To prove my point, let's imagine for a second the likely ingredients that would go into the greatest pitching performance ever. It's likely that the pitcher throwing it would be at least somewhat experienced. Maybe he already has a few big league seasons under his belt, maybe even an accolade or two. You'd figure that for a team to be dominated so profoundly, they'd have to have a pretty poor offense. It's probably likely that the pitcher would have been locked in from the first pitch to get him into a good rhythm for a game so monumental, and what we actually have to work with is pretty much the polar opposite of everything I just said. In the middle of a 3 consecutive NL Central title run for the first time in franchise history, the Houston Astros were one of the best teams in baseball, powered by one of the game's best offenses. This may have even been the greatest offense the Astros had in their history up to this point. Their lineup featured a handful of the guys who were present for their 2005 World Series run, which we talked about last video, Bagwell, Biggio, and Everett to name a few, as well as some other great hitters like Moises Alou and Derek Bell. You'll see what some of these guys had to say about the game shortly. Each of their starting position players were above average OBP guys, the team was 4th in runs scored, and they were in the top 10 in all of baseball in strikeout rate. It may be surprising that one of that year's best offenses were on the short end of maybe the greatest pitching performance ever. And that's the point. Pitching dominance can happen at any time and can be done by anyone. Now let's talk about the one. First round draft pick Kerry Wood was pitching in his first big league season and had only 4 starts under his belt going into his outing against Houston. He was one of the most hyped prospects of his time, and through his first 4 big league outings had 2 good and 2 bad. About a week before the game, he had given up 7 runs in an inning and 2/3 against the Dodgers, so it was a bit hard for Chicago to guess what they were going to get the rest of the way from their young starter, which is a small and inconsistent sample to work with. Let's take a step back for a second and talk about a stat we haven't before. It's called game score, and it was invented by Bill James, one of the most influential baseball minds to ever grace the game. Comparing a pitcher's performance with either a future or past version of himself, or someone else entirely, isn't that easy. James wanted to create a stat that could sum up a pitcher's performance in one game into one coherent number. Quality starts were the only comparable metric at this point, but the quality start just isn't a good stat. Here's an example of why. Bartolo Colon throws a complete game giving up 4 runs on 3 hits. Justin Verlander throws 5 innings and gives up 3 runs on 9 hits. Colon's ERA that game was 4. Verlander's was 5.4. Only one of those two gets credit for a quality start, and it isn't the good-looking one. Colon would have a higher game score in this case, as he did have the better outing on the mound. And this is why game score is a much better metric to use for quantifying a pitcher's performance in a single game than one which tracks whether or not he gave up 3 runs or less in at least 5 innings of work. Game score isn't a stat that accounts for ballparks or run scoring environment, so it isn't close to perfect, but it's still interesting to account for. We'll come back to it later. For now though, let's talk about the game itself. Here was Houston's starting 9 for their game in Chicago on the 6th of May in 1998. Carl Everett and Bill Spires were the only 2 regulars out of the lineup. The Achilles heel of Kerry Wood was his control. He was sometimes pretty wild, something you could clearly see that day as he was throwing his warm-up pitches. As he so gracefully put it himself, he was all over the place. So much so that he cut his warm-ups early and told pitching coach Phil Reagan that he wanted to save what little he had for the game. His silver lining was that he honestly thought it couldn't get any worse. Can you believe that? Greatest game ever, and this guy's thinking he's due to completely tank. Although after seeing the first pitch of the game, you thought maybe he could have been right. The first pitch of maybe the greatest game ever thrown turned out to be a wild pitch that hit home plate umpire Jerry Meals square in the face. What was even cooler, though, was that Wood followed that first pitch up by coming back to strike out the side in the first inning and striking out the first two batters in the second inning and striking out the next... well, he struck out a lot of batters in the game. Houston outfielder Dave Clark recalled what Jeff Bagwell had told him in the dugout after his first inning matchup against Kerry Wood. "Boys, it's going to be a long day. Or maybe it's going to be a short day." Another good Astros hitter in Moises Alou was a pretty confident guy. He'd have his own history in the future as a member of the Cubs in that same ballpark. After his first go-around with Kerry Wood, he went back to the dugout, looked shortstop Ricky Gutierrez straight in the face, and said, "Good luck." They already knew Kerry had ascended to a higher plane of existence on the mound that day. In that aforementioned second inning, Wood just came short of 6 straight punch-outs when Dave Clark flew out to center, which was one of 2 balls hit that game to leave the infield. No big deal. Wood struck out his first 5 batters, struck out another 5 consecutive batters in the 4th and 5th innings, and then took it a step further towards the end of his historic outing. In the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings, Wood faced Bagwell, Howell, Alou, Clark, Gutierrez, Ausmus, Spires, Biggio, and Bell. With only a month of play under their belts, this is a rough approximation, but let's do some quick math. Heading into that game, these are the probabilities of these hitters individually striking out. Heading into his 7th inning of work, the probability of Kerry Wood striking out 9 straight batters to break a major league record and end his game with 22 strikeouts to notch another major league record was 0.00001397%. Really, really small. He didn't do it, so don't worry about it. The probability he'd strike out 8 of them, though, a little higher, but still really small. He didn't do that either, but he did strike out 7 straight batters, snickering at that measly 0.0004% probability. This was the 3rd streak of 5 strikeouts or more he had in that game alone. Another incredibly rare feat whose probability is also really small. The Astros, whose offense I described to you earlier, could get only 1 hit that day off Kerry Wood. That 1 hit was an infield hit off the glove of 3rd baseman Kevin O'Ree in the 3rd inning. There's a point to be made that had it been later in the game with the no-hitter intact, maybe that scored differently, which is an entirely other topic about the subjectivity of a scorekeeper and the problem with the error. For our sake though, just know that the only hit that he allowed to the Astros was an infield hit that some can even question the legitimacy of. Ricky Gutierrez, who actually got that hit, was later teammates with Wood when he joined the Cubs in 2000. He'd tease Kerry about it constantly, and it led to a pretty good friendship between the two. Houston announcer Bill Brown credited Wood with making the Astros offense that day look like it was made up of high schoolers. Pretty funny considering Wood was in high school himself just a couple years earlier. 2 of those players were Craig Biggio and Jeff Bagwell, future Hall of Famers in their prime. 0 for 6, 4 strikeouts. In Biggio's defense though, he was the only Houston hitter to not strike out multiple times, so go Jeff, woo. The heart of the Houston order, Bagwell, Howell, and Alou, 0 for 9, 9 strikeouts. 3 hitters representing the heart of the legendary Houston lineup, 3 hat tricks. In his historic performance at Wrigley, Kerry Wood had at least 1 strikeout in every inning. He only let 2 balls out of the infield, gave up 1 infield hit, struck out at least 5 consecutive batters 3 times, and got only 7 batters out by doing anything other than striking them out. 9 innings pitched, 1 hit, 0 walks, and a major league record tying 20 strikeouts. Wood was only the 2nd pitcher ever to match his age and strikeouts in a single game. Poor Jamie Moyer could barely do that in his entire final season with Philly at age 47. The Max Scherzer game I discussed at the beginning of this video, his 17 strikeout no-hitter, featured the 2nd highest game score for a pitcher ever, only bested by Kerry Wood, whose outing against the Astros in 1998 resulted in the highest game score for any pitcher of all time in a 9-inning game. Here's a fun fact that actually connects these two. The Astros and Cubs that game combined for 30 strikeouts, which set the National League record at that point, a record which wouldn't be broken for 17 years when the Mets and Nationals combined for 35 strikeouts in 2015. The same game that Scherzer threw his 17 strikeout no-hitter. Baseball, man. Was this in fact the greatest game ever pitched? It's a tough question. Game score only goes so far in answering it. It isn't a context stat that can adjust for things outside of the pitcher's control, among other issues like the following. In 1963, there was a game between the Milwaukee Braves and the San Francisco Giants, a game which led Jim Kaplan to write a book called The Greatest Game Ever Pitched. Juan Marichal and Warren Spahn were in the midst of the greatest pitching duel of all time, each throwing 15 shutout innings before Spahn gave up a walk-off in the 16th. Marichal's 16 shutout innings on 8 hits, 4 walks, and 10 strikeouts gave him a game score of 112, higher than Wood's, but over almost 2 games worth of innings crammed into one. Now, Wood was more dominant over his 9 innings, but who's to say that if he had gone another 6, he wouldn't have given up a few runs? Would he have been able to shut out the Astros for 16 innings like Marichal did to the Braves? Disregarding pitch count, my guess is yes, but we just don't know. Some of you may think otherwise and think Marichal's 16 shutout innings were more impressive. I, however, do think that this was the greatest pitching performance in any Major League game ever. It was easily better than Scherzer's no-hitter. I mean, did you see the lineup the Mets had out that day? It's not really a lineup built for getting hits. I do think Wood's performance stands alone at the top, mostly for how improbable it really was, obviously combined with the actual on-field performance. Let's go back and look at our ingredients for the best pitching performance ever, and look at what actually happened. Experienced pitcher? How about a 20-year-old rookie making his 5th Major League start? A poor hitting team, maybe even mediocre at best? How about the American League's best offense and the best Houston lineup in franchise history at that point? A pitcher locked in from the start? I'll do you one better. How about a pitcher who doesn't even remember throwing a single strike in his warm-up, and basically assaulted home plate umpire Jerry Meals' face with his first pitch? Here's another tidbit thrown into the mix. Maybe you'd expect a large crowd in this dream game, to give the pitcher some adrenaline behind him. The attendance at Wrigley on May 6, 1998 was the lowest of any game that regular season. This game is atop the mountain of historic pitching performances, of course due to the 20 strikeouts, the 1 hit, no walks, but it's even more impressive in my eyes because by all accounts, it shouldn't have even happened, and its existence is as baffling as it was unpredictable. It's a perfect metaphor for baseball as a sport, and that's what stands out to me above all else. Kerry Wood was the 1998 National League Rookie of the Year. He led the league in strikeouts per 9 and posted a 1.29 ERA+. This would be the best season of his professional career. The remainder of Wood's time in baseball was filled with injuries, plaguing a career that had so much potential. He transitioned to being a full-time closer in 2008 with a whip nearly under 1 in his final All-Star season. After spending some time with some other teams, he found his way back to Chicago for the last 2 years of his career. His final Major League appearance came almost 14 years to the day after his 20 strikeout game and struck out the only batter he faced. As much as it was on brand for Kerry Wood, he ended his career with a strikeout at Wrigley Field. Here's Kerry Wood himself looking back on that all-time performance.
Why me on that day? I was slipping, it was raining, it was just, not a great day for baseball, good lineup, the whole thing. It was meant to be for me that day, I guess. There's no other way to explain it.
I want to thank you all very much for watching, but I do have a couple of other things to talk to you about before we're done. So if you saw yesterday's community post, you'll know that this is the last video I'm going to be making on the channel for just a little while. I'm having jaw surgery pretty soon and it's going to be wired shut for 4 to 8 weeks, so that pretty much means no narrating videos for a month or 2. It is possible that I can maybe narrate through my teeth down the line or something, sounding pretty close to normal, but we'll just have to wait and see. While you won't likely hear my voice for a little while, I have gotten some good friends / past SRS contributors who have offered to narrate some scripts that I write, so you'll still have my editing and writing to hold you over while I'm down. The first thing like this you'll see is going to be a video on what I think is the craziest story in baseball ever, if not the craziest story in sports ever, which is going to come out a little later this month, narrated by a fan favorite guest, so look out for that. I've really tried to go all out with the last few videos before I had to leave, especially the White Sox one, which so many of you, myself included, think is the best video we've ever done. I really can't say enough how much I appreciate some of the comments on that one, like seriously. This is the first video I've done since then, so I just wanted to say a formal thank you. You can expect more videos like that down the line. As for a look at what's to come, I do have a pretty big announcement. I'm going to take this time over the next few months to write a giant video. It could be the length of the White Sox one, it could be 45 minutes long, it could be an hour long, like that kind of big. It's going to be a mega documentary on the Wilpons and their time running the New York Mets. It looks like the team is finally being sold. I've been wanting to do this for like over a year now, and I think that this is the best time to get started on it. If all goes well, Jeff Wilpon permitting, the timeline for the sale lines up with my expected recovery time, so it looks like it could work out pretty well. If you want to see any content creators in the Mets fandom, whether that be from YouTube, Twitter, or pretty much anywhere else, you can leave a comment down below and I'll try reaching out to them to see if they'd like to be a part of it. And feel free to tag them on social media too, just letting them know about the open invitation. As always, you can go follow me on Twitter if you'd like to stay updated with my progress, and I'll still be tweeting about baseball over there too. I'm sure we'll make a community post down the line with updates on the Wilpon video as well as my recovery timeline. But anyways, thank you all for listening, and thank you all very much for watching. I really hope 2020 takes it easy on us over the next couple months. But that's all for me today. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks, guys.